How did I choose the animal that I'm working on? I work on fish, and I'm kind of just a fish nut. So, I grew up fishing, and so I have been fascinated by fishes my whole life. That's kind of guided how I do my research. I just work on fish. The reason why I do that in kind of my scientific lab is that there are lots of questions that are open to working on fishes that aren't as easily worked on in other animals. So let's try to give you an example. Fishes are what are known as basal vertebrates. So they're kind of like the first or most primitive animals that have a backbone, a vertebra. Because of that, a lot of the organ systems in fishes, like sensory systems and kind of muscles and things like that, are very related to humans, which are a very simple vertebrate system to be able to ask questions about biology.
Well, I've worked on quite a few different kinds of organisms, and I think the real important thing to keep in mind is that you have to choose the model system which is most appropriate for the question that you're asking. And so, for example, if you want to study what's going on the inside of an animal, it's really nice to have an animal that's clear and translucent so that you can actually see what's going on. Or if you want to work on an animal that regenerates missing parts, it's really nice if you can find an animal that basically regenerates its missing parts in days rather than months or years. It turns out that you really need to think carefully about the appropriate organism for the kinds of questions that you're really asking. Some organisms are very difficult to keep in the laboratory. If you look at Antarctic animals, for example, that live at 4 degrees centigrade, everything goes very slowly. It's very hard to reproduce those kinds of conditions in the laboratory, and most biological events are very slow at those temperatures. So in many cases, those kinds of organisms would really not be that amenable to the kinds of questions that we'd like to ask in the laboratory. There are many other things about how to keep animals. Are they cheap to keep? How do you feed them? Are the animals very sensitive? Can you get them to breed in the laboratory, or do you have to go out to the field and collect animals every time you want to do an experiment? So all of those issues come into play when you're trying to decide what the most appropriate organism is for the kinds of questions that you're really interested in answering.
How did I choose my model organism? Well, it's actually multiple factors. The primary one really was the biological question that I was interested in. So it's important to pick an animal that can answer the question you're interested in. So that was the first thing. But it was balanced by practical issues. It was really important to me that the research animal that I was going to work with was one that I could raise in the laboratory, because if we needed to do experiments every day, we don't have time to go out in the field and find the animal and then bring it back and then start an experiment. So I picked an animal that I already knew someone else had developed the technique to raise in the lab. And then the final thing was actually economics. At the time when I was choosing my research organism, I didn't have a steady job yet, so I wanted an animal that was inexpensive to raise. And I study marine worms, and you can raise them. You need a bowl or a dish, mud, and seawater, and that's it. And so it was pretty straightforward.